Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host and speaker, Martin Tietz. I'm the Group Director of Product Management and Product Marketing, and I'd like to talk about what's new in SQLBase 11.7 today. Actually, just today, we did launch SQLBase 11.7 to the public. So from our website, you can see all the documentation on what's new in SQLBase 11.7 and, of course, also download the trial software for SQLBase 11.7. This is the new splash screen of SQLBase 11.7, and let me give you a high-level introduction to what's new in SQLBase 11.7 first. First, you will get software that allows you to be 64-bit at work, leverage all the power of your processors, 64-bit processors, and 64-bit operating systems like Windows 64-bit, Windows 7 64-bit, Windows 8 64-bit, or Windows Server 2012 64-bit. You get unbreakable 256-bit AES encryption for the databases as well as for the client-server communications. And we have enhanced one thing that has always been very important for SQLBase: easy to use, easy to configure. So these three themes are the major new things in SQLBase 11.7. A 64-bit server, much enhanced security, and a lot more simplicity. So the configuration, mass setup, mass deployment are much easier for you to do. So more details about 64-bit in SQLBase 11.7. You can install a Windows 64-bit server if you like. You also have 64-bit client drivers. So you can basically choose between 64-bit and 32-bit drivers. You also get a 64-bit SQL talk, so there's a complete set of 64-bit server and tools available for you, so you have a complete 64-bit experience here. The database files of the 64-bit server and 32-bit servers are compatible, so basically you can take a 32-bit database file and copy that onto a SQLBase 64-bit server and run it there without any conversion tasks required and so forth. And that is true from the other way around as well. 64-bit database files can be copied to 32-bit servers. That makes management, deployment of your applications and databases very easy. SQLBase 11.7 automatically converts SQLBase 11.6 database files to the latest 11.7 version. Again, a feature that makes deployment very easy. All SQLBase products do include the 32-bit and the 64-bit installers. It is your choice what server to install. If you're running on a 64-bit Windows that doesn't have a 32-bit subsystem, that's a configuration that you can actually get from Microsoft, then you must run the 64-bit server. If you're calling external functions in a stored procedure, all calls must be either 32-bit or 64-bit, and of course match the bitness of the server. So external function calls need to match the bitness of the server. That's an important thing to realize. So here's a little demonstration of the 64-bit server of SQLBase. I do already have SQLBase 11.7 64-bit running here. And you can see that the server screen pretty much looks the same, but has some little enhancements to previous versions, like transports here is new in the server status and client process ID. So that helps you to exactly find out what kind of client transportation you're using and what client process ID is actually called, behind that client name here. That client name could be multiple processes, so that allows you to distinguish the client process ID here. Now let me also start a SQL talk 64-bit. See that here, and all those have the new SQLBase icons. So now I do have a 64-bit SQL talk and a 64-bit server running, and I can, as always, connect to iland. And as I have a pretty default installation, I can just type connect island, and it will connect to the database. And here you see on the server screen the client name, username, database name, idle status is idle, transport is TCP version 4. More about that later, and the client process ID is 8112. Now, how do I show you that this is really a 64-bit software? Let's go to the Task Manager in Windows. From there, you can see that I'm actually running a 64-bit Windows that has a 32-bit subsystem installed. And you see certain processes in that here, like PowerPoint.exe, do have a *32 behind the name of the executable. Those are running in 32-bit mode, and those that do not have anything behind the process name actually are 64-bit processes, which in this case is SQL Talk, and which also should be DB Server GUI and DB and T Server. So a number of processes here that all running in 64-bit mode here. So just a quick intro on SQLBase 64-bit. Disconnect all. Control-Enter, all cursors disconnected. Okay, let's go back to PowerPoint for a second. What about security in SQLBase 11.7? The optional security features previously available in the Treasury Edition are now available in all SQLBase products. You get new unbreakable 256-bit AES key length database encryption, which is, the most powerful encryption you can get nowadays. And the previous encryption we had, triple DES 128-bit, was never hacked, so this one is even stronger and protects your data as much as you can. You also get new unbreakable 256-bit AES communication encryption using OpenSSL, which is built into the new client drivers. Unbreakable database and communication encryption. SQLBase 11.7 prevents brute force attacks, so bad guys that want to guess passwords are pretty much prevented from doing that, and also prevents denial of service attacks. So if somebody wants to bring your server down just by, or make your server unresponsive just by sending out many connection requests, then this will be prevented by SQLBase. And SQLBase also prevents direct file access, so nobody can directly hack into the database, really. So the bad guys are kept out with SQLBase 11.7. Looking for the simplification part. What we give you in SQLBase 11.7 are new, easy-to-use and configure database drivers. If you like, you don't need to use any sql.ini file anymore. These client drivers are self-configuring. If you do not provide parameters, SQL-based client drivers will try to guess and create a connection anyway. We do have IP version 6 support. You saw on the server screen that I was using IP version 4 before, and now you see why we have added that to the server screen, just to show you what kind of transport layers we have available. We do have a new fully managed .NET data provider, which is not calling any other not managed DLLs anymore as it did before, so it's totally C# written, fully managed .NET. We also have connection tracing and debugging, so we can help you find out database connection problems. And those drivers are backward compatible. Your configuration files, your existing sql.ini files continue to work if you want to use them. The new drivers for SQLBase 11.7 or SQLBase 11.7 also provides a new set of drivers for team developer, which allow you to use the SQLBase RC1, RC2, RC3 isolation levels for great multi-user performance. These drivers do also support the new SQLBase 11.7 features like IP version 6, for example. So, old-fashioned data management, that is, in my eyes, the SQLBase isolation levels, cursor stability, and release log. In these cases, X logs are basically construction sites that totally block the road, even to reading processes. So you would see something like this: road closed ahead, and that results, if you're in a multi-user situation with many reporting processes and many people working on the database, that's really not a nice thing to have, and that blocks processes and can cause timeouts, rollbacks, and things like that. Modern data management really is using the RCX isolation levels, which means there's a high-speed detour available for X-logs. So basically, we provide a way to drive around the problem that currently exists, the problem being the X-log, for example, and traffic can continue to run even though there is some work going on. So this is actually a Team Developer 6.1 application. Let me run this one now. And this application has 3 tabs, and each tab basically does exactly the same things, only it does the same things in a different isolation level. RC1 is the first example. So what this application does here, it first selects data, then it updates the city and commits, and then we will fetch data. And depending on the RC level, you will see new data or you will see the existing data, because all the RC isolation levels are all based on the timestamp of when a transaction starts. From that point of time, you will see consistent data, and you can in details manipulate when you get new data. You can basically see, I only want to see new data when a new transaction starts. That is RC1. RC2 is I want to see data when a new SQL statement is being executed, and RC3 is I want to see new data when any new client call to SQLBase is initiated. So basically, you get new data when you just do a fetch next. So let's start the RC1 demo here. And you will see this is the timestamp of the first select here. And I go next, and that timestamp does not change. Then I do a new command, which runs in RC1 as well. So it's a new cursor, and you still see the timestamp has not changed, though the updated and committed values have not kicked in here, because we have not started a new transaction yet. In SQLBase RC2, let me do the same thing, and you see there's a new timestamp now here. If I scroll through that data, that timestamp does not change. So SQL fetch next does not change the timestamp of that transaction. But if I execute a new command, like I execute a new SQL statement, then I do get the new data that has been updated via the update here through a different transaction. And then in SQLBase RC3, let me start the demo as well. Here, the actual timestamp should change already when I press fetch next here. See? So it changed when I pressed fetch next. So that's the quickest way to get changed data into your application when using the RC isolation levels. SQLBase 11.7 simplification also means Windows and Active Directory authentication. So basically, you do not need to use the SQLBase built-in users anymore. You can use the Windows users you are using in your domain or on your machines to define the database users and manage access to the databases. You basically communicate the client credentials across the network. What you have to do if you use network authentication, the username needs to be a star, and that means it's the network username. So basically, if you have username star, then you connect using the machine, the current username of the machine, or if you're connected to a remote server, the Active Directory name of a user on that remote machine. So basically, the server has to recognize the client's credentials in order to complete the connection. The user's network credentials get mapped into database username. So how is that being set up? If you speak strictly SQL, that basically is done using grant connect to username identified by external, and then domain / username. So pretty much how Windows users are being defined, domain / username. And if you're using a single machine without a domain, then it's just the username here that you're using. So connect eagle */ that would connect you to the database eagle if you are being set up, if your database has been set up to allow the current Windows user to be the database user. And we will see a little demo of that actually now. So go back to SQL Talks and SQLBase. Let me open a predefined file where I have several commands built in that file already. Should we open that file now? Yeah, okay. So what I would do is first I want to connect to the island database using my standard sysadm connection. You can see I'm now connected, and you see all the background information on the server screen here. And now, as an administrator, I do define myself as a new database user identified by external Martin. So basically, Martin is my username on my Windows machine here, and I define that as a database username. Connect authority granted. Do a commit. Let's disconnect all. And now I can use network authentication to connect to the island database. So connect island, use the username of */nothing because I'm using Windows authentication. Never execute that. Then you can see cursor 1 connected to island, and you see I'm connected to the database. Username is Martin, and now I can, for example, execute selects as being authenticated as a Windows user. Now this one here, if I execute select star from sysadm.sysuserauth, throws a security violation, which is okay. Actually, let me disconnect as I don't have the rights assigned to that user. So let me again connect as sysadm and then do that query again, because that query kind of shows how the system tables manage external authentication. And you see that there's a username Martin here. And flag is E for external, and the external user is Martin. So that's kind of how that is linked together in the sysuser authentication table. Okay, so that was a quick one for how to set up network authentication. It's pretty easy, right? Disconnected. Where's my cursor? Mouse. Back to the presentation. Simplified client components. Each client now is a single dynamic library. That before we had for every driver we had a file, and then that file would call other files. So there were multiple dependencies, and now by making them all one single dynamic library, you get a reduced amount of DLL version conflicts. You can easily verify the DLL version and build number, and you will be sure that this is what it is. And this will not call anything else having a different version, for example. So here's the C client API as a version 11.7, and that even has built in the error.sql file. So that is really a new client driver that has everything in it. So for you to very easily publish and provide those DLLs to your users. So basically, those are the client drivers SQLBase 11.7 has. The sql.ntm.dll is the general SQLBase application programming interface. Then there's a new SQLBase odbc.dll, which is the open database connectivity. And this one does not call the sql.ntm.dll. It has everything built into it. It needs into itself. And the same with SQLBase OLADB.dll for the OLADB database access. And for the .NET data provider, gupta.sqlbase.data.dll, which is a fully managed C# written data provider. And also the new SQLBase JDBC driver is fully Java and doesn't call any external things. There's another new thing that I kind of want to announce now. That's the Gupta SQLBase.DDEX, Visual Studio Data Designer Extensibility, which basically will be a driver that will come with Service Pack 1 of SQLBase that allows you to install itself into Visual Studio and use the Visual Studio database manager and Visual Studio classes to write applications for SQLBase with point and click. So the .NET provider, written in C# for .NET, automatically supports 32-bit and 64-bit applications. So this is kind of has the any build type in .NET and will run on 32 and 64-bit. Supports SSL and network authentication. Here's an important change. The client drivers basically have been reworked so that the communication DLLs have been eliminated. So COMDLLs in sql.ini aren't really required anymore. You can still use them, as I said. Those are the old settings are backward compatible, But now you're using something which is called transports, and transports equals TCP4, TCP version 6, or NPipe for network authentication, for example. If transports are specified, it overrides the COMDLL section. So the new transport layer has higher priority than the COMDLL section. So here are new IP transports, for example. If you're using IP version 4, then you could put transports equals TCP into sql.ini. If you use IP version 6, the new IP protocol, then we would put transports equals TCP v6. Or you could actually put both, transports equals TCP and TCP v6. So whatever your server supports for protocols, you could have them enabled in the client so the connection will work in any case. Transports name pipe support. You get better than anonymous pipes in the past. Supports local and remote connections. Can be restricted to local only connections. And this is the transport that you need to use for network authentication. If you want to use the Windows users or the active the network user, then you need to use name pipe support. So you would basically put in this into your sql.ini file, transports equals npipe. So here's a comparison of an old SQLBase 11.6 client sql.ini file and the new one on the right side for SQLBase 11.7. On the 11.7 side, you see that you just have in the Win32 client section transports equals and then npipe and WS32. And that's pretty much it, where you had to have a lot more configuration details in your previous SQLBase 11.6 clients. And another thing is you can work without any sql.ini file on the client. So you basically can provide a connection string at connect time to SQLBase and provide the details you want to connect to, like database, transport, host name, port, username. You can all provide them in the connection string to connect to SQLBase without having a client configuration available. And you see those two samples here. The one sample in orange there, username equals star, means that is a network authentication, Windows or Active Directory authentication. So here's the part Visual Studio DDEX, Visual Studio tools and wizards with SQLBase. In the server explorer of Visual Studio, you will basically be able to connect to SQLBase, view all the tables, store procedures, views, indexes, foreign keys. And for example, you can select a table and drop that table onto a form, and then it will create a grid for you automatically and things like that. So all the things that you have in Visual Studio for database access, and that database access is closely linked to how certain data-enabled widgets like grids work. You can also use those with SQLBase. So here's the SQLBase 11.7 summary. You get a 64-bit server, security with AES 256-bit encryption, SSL communication, network authentication for Active Directory and Windows. Simplicity, you get single DLL clients, connection strings without sql.ini, a new .NET data provider, and Visual Studio DDEX driver. So here we are in the question and answer section. You can find more about all this on guptatechnologies.com, on our YouTube channel, on Facebook as well. And if you have questions, please put them into the WebEx question tool. When will the drivers be available for TD6.0 is the question. Really, the drivers are coming with SQLBase 11.7. But you will be able to only use them in when you deploy your application, really, because these drivers are linked to certain, well, actually to Report Builder and to the Database Explorer of TD. So basically, I would suggest to use them for the deployed application or test them with a exe file and not with the IDE itself for TD6.0. And we will provide a TD6.1 service pack, let me think, service pack 3, I guess, is the next one, That will then include the fully built-in client drivers for 11.7 so that they work nicely with all the client tools like Report Builder, Database Explorer, OffTD, and everything. Okay, so thank you for joining us today, and I wish you a great day, great evening, wherever you are in the world. Goodbye, and talk to you soon again. Thank you.